Good morning, everyone. We will continue with Deep Water. Deep Water by William Douglas. We have already been introduced to the author, William Douglas, who was a man of grit and determination. He, after completing his Bachelor of Arts degree and teaching for 2 years English and economics in Yakima, decided to take up a legal career and went back to law school, and he became the longest serving justice in the history of America. 36 years he served. He has written a beautiful autobiography of Men and Mountains, and in this he has spoken about a misadventure in childhood when he was thrown into the pool at YMCA by a bruiser, by a bully, and he has described his drowning most vividly, how he was swept by fear, how his legs were becoming limp, how they appeared very heavy, how he could not breathe. Whenever he shouted out, water filled in, and he was in great fear, great trauma. And we also read that he was tired of trying again and again to save himself, and finally he accepted death. We looked at how the water threw him back 3 times, but the 4th time he went down, he decided he could not fight anymore. Then all effort ceased. I relaxed. Even my legs were limp, and a blackness swept over my brain. It swept out fear. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This was nice, to be drowsy, to go to sleep. No need to jump, too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. Tender arms of mother, tender arms around me, tender arms like mother's. Now I must go to sleep. He says, I crossed to oblivion, and the curtain of life appeared to have fallen. We talked about this metaphor. Life had ended. He thought his life was over. But next he remembered he was lying on his stomach beside the pool, vomiting, and the chap that threw me in was saying, but I was only fooling. And someone said, scolded him, the kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room. So, how do you think Douglas was saved? How do you think he came out of the water? Yes, the bruiser himself must have called for assistance when he realized this boy was drowning, and he saved the life. Several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. I shook and cried. And when I lay on my bed, I could not eat that night. For days a haunting fear was in my heart. The slightest exertion upset me, making me wobble in the knees and sick to my stomach. I never went back to the pool. I feared water. I avoided it whenever I could. This was his condition, a case of severe hydrophobia. Fear of water, hydrophobia. And then as he grew up, few years later, you know, in America, people enjoy their weekends. They go for water sports. They go for visiting beautiful sites. So whenever he went to the Cascades, Cascades are fountains, waterfalls. I wanted to get into them, he says. But whenever he went to any water body, be it the Teton or the Bumping Rivers, or for a bath in the warm lake, the terror that had seized me in the pool would come back. He says the fear would always return and he would be paralyzed. Icy horror would grab my heart. See the description, icy horror. When you are frightened, there is a chill, and the chill is being spoken about here. This handicap stayed with me as the years rolled by. For many years, he was troubled by this problem of hydrophobia. And then he finally one October, I decided to get an instructor. And taking a personal instructor 5 days a week, 1 hour each day, was very expensive. But then he took an instructor, and the instructor taught him step by step. First, he was taught how to get free of the fear of water when he was inside the water. So the trainer used a very unique method. He fixed a belt around his waist and he hung him with the help of a rope, and he walked up and down the side of the pool. And this man, now a man, William Douglas, was made to hang above the water level and through the help of a pulley, and sometimes he was dipped into the water. Gradually, he says it was 3 months before the tension began to slack. His fear began to slacken, and then he was taught to exhale and inhale in the water without sucking in water. And after that, he was made to sit on the side of the pool and kick with his legs. For weeks, he did that to develop his leg muscles. And now he was ready. Piece by piece, he built a swimmer. The trainer built a swimmer out of him, and then he took a test. Now you can swim, dive off and swim the length of the pool. Crawl, stroke, various strokes were taught to him. I did. The instructor had finished his job, but he was not satisfied. He was frightened, terror-stricken, and he took self-tests. Whenever he went alone to a pool, tiny vestiges of the old terror would return. But he devised a method to fight that fear. But now I would frown and say to the terror, trying to scare me, eh? Well, here's to you, look, and off I would go for another length of the pool. So he developed his own method. See, people can give you guidelines, but the final trick is yours. So Douglas developed this trick, this method of personifying terror and scaring it with his words. This went on till July. He continued to go to various pools, and he was unsuccessful all the time, in the sense the old sensation returned in miniature. Little bit was always there. Yet he used his trick. Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me? And it fled. It stands for fear, and I swam on. But then success met him when he was at Warm Lake he went there and he crossed the pool with no element of fear at all. And the next day morning I dived into the lake and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doug Corporon used to do. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. So he was very excited, and like Doug Corporon, his friend, he was also Douglas Corporon. He was an explorer. He was a mountaineer. He had climbed mountains. So just as a mountaineer is happy when he has actually climbed a peak, William Douglas experienced the same kind of joy when he was successful swimming across the pool without any terror at all. And then the author says, this experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. So this is the advantage of an autobiography. And like Roosevelt, he believed all we have to fear is fear itself. Fear itself is dangerous. You should live with no fear. And he says, once he had overcome the fear of dying, the sensation of dying, the will to live grew in me intensely. Desire to live, love for life became very strong. And at last I felt released, he says. Released from what? Released not from hydrophobia, but from fear itself, all kinds of fear. Therefore, he was free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and to brush aside fear. Now he could take up any sport, any activity, and he could feel confident about it with no fear returning to him. So finally he has brushed aside fear. So the message of this story is that no one should live with fear, because a small fear can blow out of proportion and can create hell. Therefore, the author, you see, continued with taking self-tests until he was absolutely sure there was no fear left in him. So this is the message for all the readers, all the students, that if you have any kind of fear, fear of darkness, fear of height, try to educate yourself, try to explain to yourself, improvise your own methods and overcome fear. Become a fearless person, fearless in the sense not being rash, but not being paralyzed by any kind of fear, not to be harmed by your own fear. So this is about the text. The questions are easy. Read them. You will be able to understand them if you have understood the text. This was definitely a beautiful story, an experience, real life, and I'm sure you have all enjoyed it and learned a big lesson from it. Thank you, everyone.